Hello and welcome to Sunday Thoughts for Sunday the 20th of June. I hope you're all keeping okay. Thank you so much for taking time to join us today. It's the time of year when school children are literally counting the days, perhaps the hours and minutes, until the summer holidays begin. The lazy, hazy days of summer. Here's hoping, eh? But if any group are even more keen to escape school, it is, of course, the teachers. Energy is running out. Reports have to be written within specific formats, spell-checked and submitted. And then all the thinking and planning for September has to be done as well before the end of this term. And it's been a hellish year for everybody, but particularly in schools. It's been a really tough year. If any of you who are not teachers were to try teaching for just a day, you would discover it's really, really hard work. I had to do some of it in training for ministry at Trinity 30-something years ago, and I was exhausted by the end of the day. It's hard mentally, it's hard thinking and planning, it's hard physically, being on your feet, speaking all day, sometimes shouting, adding occasional crowd control issues, very, very hard work. Jesus spent a lot of his time teaching, and he travelled a lot, and he didn't live in hotels, and he worked in a hot climate. He was often surrounded by hordes of people, and on occasions found himself exhausted. Sometimes he just needed time to get away. Here's a story from Mark's Gospel.
Mark 4, verses 35 to 41. Jesus calms the storm. That day, when evening came, he said to the disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. There was also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." When the wind died down and it was completely calm, he said to the disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him."
So in the story, it's evening time. Jesus has had enough of crowds, people, and busyness. And he and his friends head to the shore, get into a little boat to cross. There are other boats too. Maybe other people had the same idea. Let's sail away for the evening. Now, the most common type of boat in those days in Jesus' part of the world was just a small fishing boat with low sides, made low so it was easy to pull the nets from the water into the boat. But as Jesus and his friends travel, a storm blows up from nowhere. Water starts pouring into the boat. And the disciples, many of them well used to this kind of situation because they fish for a living, they are frozen with fear. Let's think about fear for a moment, because it's a word that crops up a couple of times in today's story. It's one of those unusual words that can mean different things. To fear, obviously, can mean to be frightened out of your wits. Something around you has changed. You're in a situation that you can't control and you're not sure how to get out. You'll experience fear. Now, there are common fears. Fears of heights, fears of spiders. Friends of mine have a fear of flying. You might have a fear of closed spaces. I have a fear of birds. I'm not particularly fond of chickens. Some people have a fear of crowds. We call those kind of fears phobias. A lot of people, though, get particularly fearful when the forces of nature let loose. And it's understandable, because the forces of nature around us are huge. And sometimes we can do very little to control them. They can bring about earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, hurricanes, floods, forest fires. All of those are pretty scary in their own right. Even on a smaller scale, thunder and lightning, very, very frightening. as someone much more famous than me once sang. The disciples are out in the water with Jesus, convinced this is the end. They're going down. And Jesus is asleep. In the face of terror, with the forces of nature going mental, Jesus is asleep. And the disciples waken him with the words, "Don't you care? Don't you care that we're going to drown?" Now, when Jesus speaks, he doesn't initially talk to the disciples. First thing is, he speaks to the forces of nature. In the story, he just stands up and he calms the storm. He rebukes the wind and the waves. Now, the word rebuke here is a pretty strong word. It's the same word that the Gospel writers use, for example, to describe Jesus commanding a demon to come out of someone. There's no messing with this kind of voice and this kind of command and this kind of authority. Jesus speaks to the forces of nature and the storm calms, and then he talks to his disciples. And I find his words a little harsh. Verse 40, he said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and waves obey him." What on earth was he asking of them? Well, probably to have faith and to know that if he was with them, they were in safe hands. There's an old song I sang years ago that puts it this way: "With Christ in the vessel, you can smile at the storm as we go sailing by." It's a little bit old-fashioned, and it's certainly a bit cheesy, but there's truth within the song. Now, I mentioned a moment or two ago that the word fear can mean different things, and that it crops up in this story in two different forms. First of all, when the storm is at its worst and water's pouring into the boat, the disciples are terrified. They experience fear of death. But there's a second use of the word fear in this story. Once everything is stilled, the disciples are fear-filled again, not because of the storm, that's been dealt with, but because of the power and authority in the person of Jesus that they have just witnessed. I mean, they knew that the average holy man could silence a demonic in a town square, but that only God can silence the forces of nature. Only the divine can bring order out of the chaos of a storm. What they had just heard and seen was in a completely different category. And the result is they are filled with fear. The original Greek term means they feared a great fear. I suppose the best way to describe this kind of fear is to say they were filled with an overwhelming sense of reverence and awe. A strange mixture of fear and fascination. Now, they'd been around Jesus for a while. They'd listened to him, they'd followed him, they'd watched him, they'd heard stories, they'd witnessed healings, they'd watched run-ins with the religious authorities. But this night they see something completely different. And they're asking among themselves, who is this man? Even the wind and waves obey him. This is just a short talk this morning, as always, but I want to break at this point for a song, and then we'll come back to part 2 of the talk and just wrap it up. The psalm appointed for today is Psalm 133. Here's Grace with Russell to sing a newer version of the psalm. It talks about unity and brotherhood.
How good it is when the fire Redeemer has come, for he dwells in the presence of his people. Oh, how good it is on this journey we share to rejoice with the happy and weep with those who mourn, for the weak find strength, the afflicted find grace when we offer the blessing of belonging. So with one voice we'll sing to the Lord, and with one heart we will live out his word till the whole earth sees the Redeemer has come, for he dwells in the presence of his people. Oh, how good it is to embrace his command, to prefer one another, forgive as he forgives when we live as one. We all share in the love of the Son with the Father of the Spirit. So with one voice we will sing to the Lord, and with one heart we'll live out his word till the whole earth sees the Redeemer has come, for he dwells in the presence of his people.
This is just a short talk this morning on the calming of the storm. Let me give you 3 thoughts, and we'll close with these. First thought. Every now and again in church we sing a hymn called Eternal Father, Strong to Save. And it's really a prayer for those in peril on the sea. Traditionally we'd think of people from the Navy or fishermen who are out in dangerous conditions. But in recent years, people fleeing war zones and trying to escape a country that's falling down around them have found themselves in desperate peril on the sea. Migrants hoping for a better life, a better future. It's really important that we keep people like that in our prayers. They're in peril on the sea. Second thought, when we're thinking about the calming of storms, we all face storms because the world is a lovely but also a very dangerous place. And somebody said we'd be lucky to get out of it alive. Storms come out of the blue and rock our life in different ways, our health, our financial security. But on this journey through life, if we have Christ with us, we have a divine presence to help us through the storm. And the third thing, people can actually grow through stormy times because we learn to trust. We learn what you might call big life lessons. We exercise our faith muscles if we are people of faith. The life of faith is often risky. It's certainly adventurous. Somebody once said, little boats look lovely in the harbour, but they weren't made to stay there. Boats are made for sailing, for adventures, for journeys. Some years ago, I discovered this prayer about faith and fear and storms. It's often attributed to Francis Drake, and I leave it with you this morning as we draw our thoughts to a close. Let us pray. Disturb us, Lord, when we are too pleased with ourselves, when our dreams have come true because we dreamed too little, when we arrived safely because we sailed too close to the shore. Disturb us, Lord, when, with the abundance of things we possess, we've lost our thirst for the waters of life. Having fallen in love with life, we've ceased to dream of eternity. And in our efforts to build a new earth, we've allowed our vision of the new heaven to dim. Disturb us, Lord, to dare more boldly, to venture on wilder seas, where storms will show your mastery, where losing sight of land, we shall find the stars. We ask you to push back the horizons of our hopes as we push into the future in strength, courage, hope, and love. Amen.